Today's reading is from John chapter 7. As the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles approached, Jesus' sisters and brothers said to him, "Why not leave here and go to Judea so that your disciples there can also see the works you do? Those destined for public life don't do things in secret. Since you're working these miracles, let the whole world know." For even his own siblings didn't believe in him. Jesus answered, "Now is not the right time for me, but for you, any time is right. The world can't hate you, but it hates me because I testify that its ways are evil. Go up to the feast yourselves. I am not going to this feast because my time is yet to come." Having said this, he stayed in Galilee. Ancient words for present day consideration.
Passage starts off obviously with a family feud, airing some dirty laundry there that we don't really need to know about. Have you ever been like at a restaurant with a friend, like couples, and they're sitting there arguing among themselves and inviting you to be the referee? That's kind of an unpleasant thing. That's the feeling I get in reading this part of John. It's really petty, and it shows you that even if somebody's mastered universal love, families are still tough. Because in the story, I mean, here Jesus has been raised with supposedly the brothers and sisters. Of course, this doesn't work really well with the idea that Mary was a virgin her whole life. It's like the story breaks down if you start thinking about it, so don't. At least wait till after this sermon to deconstruct. You know, I think what's happening in John is he's using these stories to illustrate something deeper. Even Jesus comes across as pretty petty when he says, "My time has not yet come. Any time's good for you." That had to go over really well. That's why the world hates me and loves you, because I say what it's doing that's evil. So you go ahead and you go to the festival. I'm not going. And then a couple of chapters later, he goes. And I think what's happening in John is you had somebody who wrote the original stories down. Probably somebody maybe named John, I don't know. But then the followers of John later put the stories together. And so the order's different than the other Gospels. Jesus comes across as really petty sometimes in John. So don't feel bad if that's your impression. But the point is not to do history in a gospel, it's to teach a spiritual lesson. So you're trying to work through the story that's presented to the insight that is there. And I think in John, a major thing is that religion can be a problem. Religion can be what keeps you from being spiritual. And I think that's said time and time again in different stories and packages and the kinds of things that originally somebody like Jesus or Moses or Lao Tse is trying to wake people up, trying to fire up your mind and your heart where you go deeper into life and you tune yourself to the cycles of life. You tune yourself to nature. But once religion becomes an institution, it doesn't want to do that anymore. It wants you to tune you to itself. So whereas I think in the original story, people are being baptized into life, into love, into a whole new way of life, what the church does is baptize you into itself. And I think what John is saying, that's a problem. It's not saying you have to abandon the church, again, at least not until after the sermon. But to realize this is just the shell of what we're trying to learn and teach. What we're doing here is the shell. There's something more profound than that. And I discovered this by reading the early church. and realizing how different it was than what I was taught. Again, in this series, I've mentioned several times that when I was in seminary, what I was taught was nobody understood Jesus until Augustine came along, hundreds of years later. And then Calvin and Luther, they understood it. For the first couple of centuries, the people that actually knew Jesus had no idea what he was doing. And the reason that was important is because the church was taken over in Europe and changed. The Sermon on the Mount was taken out of the center. That's the heart of what Jesus was trying to teach. Don't you think Jesus should get a vote on what his religion is? What it means? But when you move the Sermon on the Mount out of the story, which is what a lot of traditional Christianity has done, and you replace it with things like the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, it can be much harder to discover where the teachings are trying to lead us. The reason we're doing a series on the Sophia passages, these are mystical Jewish texts that are in the Catholic Bible, not in the Protestant Bible. The Bible we give out when people join the church, it's called the Inclusive Bible. It's written by Priests for Equality, which is kind of a contradiction in terms. We're part of the hierarchy, but everybody's equal. But it was the only text we could find that would go through and reframe it where it's not talking about power over people and it doesn't make everything sacred masculine. So we think that's a real gift. It took us a long time to find that. But what we're going to look at is a verse today, and we've been doing this for how many weeks now? How many months? Long time. But to look at the Sophia passages, the mystical Jewish texts, I think we understand a whole lot better what the early church was trying to teach. Let's look at the passage. So may God grant me, this is supposedly Solomon. The ancient writers had a poetic license to tell stories that illustrated points. So if you have a problem with the story, that's fine. Just see if you can understand the insight the story's trying to point you to. And this is supposedly Solomon speaking. So may God grant me the gift of speaking the divine will and make my own thoughts worthy of the Holy One's gifts. For even wisdom is under God's jurisdiction, and God gives direction to those who are wise. Am I blocking fewer people if I go over here? All that we are and all that we say are in God's hands, all of our knowledge and all of our skill. It was God who gave me certainty and understanding the way things are, the organization of the universe, and the working of the elements. As we're going to see, the point here is to understand the universe, not to understand the creeds, not to understand the church, but to understand how things actually work in your life. So he's learning the beginning and the end of an era and all that occurs in between, the cycles of the solstices and the changing of the seasons, the circle of the year, the position of the stars, the nature of animals and the instincts of wild beasts, the power of spirits and the thoughts of human beings, the uses of plants and the properties of roots. I didn't learn that in church. Anybody here learn that in church? Whether it was a hidden or apparent, I learned it all, for wisdom was my teacher, and it was she who designed all these things. Yes, so again, Sophia is the Greek word for wisdom. And in John, when he quotes the Logos, the word in the beginning was the word, a lot of those are coming from these Sophia passages. And a lot of it makes a lot more sense if you put it in a feminine package. Not that God has a gender, but in communion, if you're thinking about a feminine presence, then being fed is like being breastfed. If it's a guy, it's cannibalism. And I don't know about you, but that's not quite a spiritual feeling to me. So what John was doing was putting a lot of the Sophia things into a package that his culture could understand. But you're not limited to that. right? The question is what opens your heart, right? You can't start by saying what is orthodox? What's going to make the preacher happy? Bad mistake, right? What works in your life? What illumines your life? What triggers your curiosity? If the preacher tells you you can't study science because it goes against Genesis, that's not wisdom. And one of the things that's tearing the world apart is you've got whole sets of denominations of Christians who've rejected science. They've rejected fact-checking. They want to believe certain things so badly that they will come together and lie for God, for Jesus. You don't have to lie for good things. So when we listen to these passages, I hope it feels very familiar to you. And I hope that the experience you have is that you've always known this. Right? Your heart has always known this. That there's more to it. And so when I ask people, when have you experienced the sacred? Guess what everybody says? Nature. Right? But I don't ever say that publicly because then I'd be out of work. We can't have that. But isn't that where most of us have experienced it? Or at least in reality, in the face of a child, a friend at a funeral, looking at the stars, being at the ocean. Religion is like a container. And I chose it for my life. I don't hate religion at all, but it's not the flame, it's the lantern. And that's the most important thing for you to realize. That this wisdom, this word, is what's knitting you together. Nobody gives that to you. People can help bring it out, can help shape it, help articulate it. But the wisdom that people have been looking for is in the essence of who they are. So we're going to go through this kind of passage and see if we can open it up a bit more. When you look at the ancient world, one of the most common statements for mystical seekers is first, know yourself. First, know yourself. It almost has to begin with your experiences as a human being. And whatever I say has got to make sense in that context. When you try to put your experience within the context of religion, something really disorienting happens. We could call it gaslighting. Gaslighting for Jesus. When you're asked to put your experience, that's the only thing you know. What has happened to you? What have you seen? How can this text help deepen that and broaden it? Then religion's helpful. But when your wisdom is silenced by religion, that's evil. And John is playing that out in the stories of religion. In the ancient world, there was a figure called the Sphinx. You still see in Egypt. But there are a lot of sphinxes. And one of the great stories from the ancient world, Oedipus is trying to figure things out. The whole point of the Oedipus story is he doesn't know himself. He doesn't know who he is. So he can get all kinds of information, all kinds of predictions about what's going to happen, but because he doesn't know who he is, it doesn't matter. Even the best information throws him off because he doesn't know what context to put that in. So the Sphinx asks him a question. The Sphinx says, what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs in the evening? Does everybody know what it is? A human being. A human being. to realize who we are in time is very important. Every time you hear somebody say, if anything ever happens to me, you know they haven't got this one down yet. But that's kind of what we're taught. We're these permanent beings, watch everybody, everything, and everybody that we care about die. And we're sitting there going boo-hoo as though we're sitting on the shoreline. Everything belongs to the river of life. And so one of the first things we have to realize is this is a very temporary arrangement here that you're looking at right now. That's not bad news. So when I'm learning things, when there's like two different versions of religion, and I'm trying to decide how do I make sense of life, to ask the question, does this make me more wise and loving, is really helpful. That's a very helpful question to ask. How many have you been reciting the Apostles' Creed and your marriage fell together? I said, I've been a fool, darling. Probably zero. Probably zero. I mean, how many times have you heard a sermon on the two natures of Christ? You go, I need to change my job. That's not what Jesus was trying to share. Jesus came that we might live more abundantly. So that's kind of the whole game. One of the interesting passages in this, it goes through, I've learned the pattern of animals, the patterns in the sky, the seasons, this kind of stuff. And it says the power of spirits. And I heard that and said, that's not Sophia. That's not Sophia. Like all the little critters, the fairies of the forest and that kind of stuff. That's not what this passage is talking about. So I looked it up in the Greek, and the word there is pneuma, which can be spirit, if you want to take it that way, but it can also be breath. It can also be wind. And particularly from a Hebrew perspective, it was all about harmonizing ourselves within ourselves and with nature and with life. The exercise on breathing stuff. In the East, unfortunately, there's almost nothing in the Bible about this. But if you look at the words, the word breath, every time you see the word spirit, almost always that's breath. The breath is like kind of the golden key of the spiritual life. If you slow down your breath, your mind slows down. Your attention starts dissipating a bit. When you make your breath gentle, the mind tends to follow that. So that's the kind of wisdom. What makes your life work? What makes your life better? What makes you loving? What makes you wise? There was a quote from Blake about the seasons. And he says, remember the Sphinx story. What's wise for a child is not wise for an adult. And what's wise for an adult may not be wise for a child. When we try to give experiential knowledge to children, that can really throw them off. Because you only get experiential wisdom through what? Yeah. Which, another word for that is mistakes. Right? So you don't want the mistakes that kill somebody, or like a face tattoo or something like that. But what's wise for an older person is not good advice for somebody young. Young, you've got to follow that spirit, that kind of, you got to know who you are. You've got to try things. Listen to your elders to see if it's going to kill you. But in lieu of that, to follow that and learn what's wise for the butterfly is not wise for the caterpillar. Right? The job of the caterpillar is to eat, just eat. Right? That's wisdom for the caterpillar. Flying stuff comes later. So anyway, this is William Blake. In seed time, learn. In harvest, teach. In winter, enjoy. We can enjoy every stage of life, assuming pain is not overwhelming. There's lots of stuff that can happen to throw this stuff off. But a general statement is that there's wisdom at every stage of life. But you've got to realize this is temporary. So then the second thing I get from our passage is, we get in touch with our breath, then it's the common breath. We've got to learn the seasons of life. This world was not made for us. And when the church teaches that it was, in the Genesis story, it can throw people off tremendously. We are part of the tree of life, but we're a leaf on it. And we're going to destroy this planet if we don't learn that. Now, we're very, very important, but we're one aspect of the common life. And right now, when people don't know that, and somebody says that to them, they shut down. But that's what's happening, particularly from religious conservatives, is when you're told that evolution is a story and that you're woven into everybody, and you've been taught this nonsense story as a fact. Genesis is a beautiful poetic book, but it's not very good science. In fact, it's terrible science. When you have a worldview where you're at the center of it, you do tremendous violence. And this didn't start with Donald Trump. This started when the Mayflower landed. Right? Understand that idea that we're better than everybody else is not new. And what our current crisis gives us the opportunity is for all of us to realize how we have a version of that and then outgrow that. Men are not better than women. You know the whole privilege piece. So we have to leave the place of privilege, the pedestal that we built for ourselves, and join the human race. And Christians need to learn that first. We've got to model that. On YouTube, there's a guy, and I think he's like on one of these, maybe he played Jesus somewhere or something. But I'm sitting there scanning. They're on television, so YouTube is sort of my link to the rest of the world. So I'm going through that, and there's a guy that all of a sudden he's there and he says, I know you're very busy, but will you pray with me for a moment? And I can't hit the no button fast enough. And he's going, in the name of course, very, male-oriented kind of thing. But that intrusive view of Christianity is violent. And the first thing all of us have to do is step out of that and realize we are part of the common life. So we ask, does this make me loving? Does it make me wise in terms of the common life? Another quote that I like is, let's see, this is Samuel Butler. He said, autumn is the mellower season, and what we lose in flowers, we more than gain in fruits. Again, when we step out of the center of things, there's all kinds of gifts in life for us. But we have to realize what season we are in. So then the final part of this imagery is the cosmic part. The part that we are children not only of life, but of the universe. And when you look at those the telescope pictures, and something familiar strikes you, it's because that's a part of your origins. The ancients looked at the sky and they saw a clock, right? And they made up all this kind of stuff. There's 12 grids, and there's, and this planet does this, and this planet does that. It's a freaking explosion. right? We were born from an explosion, which when you think about it is kind of exciting. But we have to realize that we have to give ourselves fully to that. And to do that, we have to stop saying, why is this happening to me? And turn that around and say, how can the greater life be expressed through this situation? You are not this little critter living in terror in the universe. You are the universe being expressed in a very personal form. But you're a fireworks display. And so you give yourself fully to it. You say yes to it. And you express yourself as bravely and as beautifully as you can. The way Jesus said it is, you are light shining out of the darkness. The darkness can do a lot of things, but it can't put your light out. So whatever happens, no matter how unfair it is, in terms of your personal life or the social life or the whole planet, just let your light shine. So our story on the surface of things is a family fight, very unpleasant. You kind of just wish you weren't there. They're kind of bickering back and forth. But what John is really doing is trying to drive us deeper into the roots of who we are and to realize that religion should open our minds, should open our hearts, not close it, not make it a gated community where we're afraid to learn new things, but to realize the universe is our source. We've come out of this. And the more we learn about it, the more we learn about the creative principle of our own being. So what many people have taught is first know yourself. Put religion in the context of what your experience is. Don't negate your experience so that your religion works. Then second, to realize that life is interwoven. That we are not the center of the universe. We are woven together with everything that has being. And finally, that no matter how dark things seem to get, we are the light of the universe. I want to close with a prayer that captures some of the spirit of the early church. It's popular online. You can just type in Aramaic, the way they say it, Lord's Prayer. We don't use feudal language here. But it's the prayer that Jesus taught the disciples. You'll recognize the frame of it. You know, our parent who art in heaven, that kind of thing. But this is in Aramaic because the Aramaic language is not noun-centered. Hebrew is not noun-centered. So you get a sense of the flow of things. Think of that prayer, and this will go through that. O cosmic birther of all radiance and vibration, soften the ground of our being and carve out a space within us where your presence can abide. Fill us with your creativity so we may be empowered to bear the fruit of your mission. Let each of our actions bear fruit in accordance with our desire. Endow us with the wisdom to produce and share what each being needs to grow and flourish. Untie the tangled threads of destiny that bind us as we release others from the entanglement of past mistakes. Do not let us be seduced by that which would divert us from our true purpose, but illuminate the opportunities of the present moment. For you are the ground and the fruitful vision, the birth, power, and fulfillment, as all is gathered and made whole once again. And instead of amen, it says, and so it is. Well, this is my attempts to unpack our passage today. We'll take a moment, as always, where you can think about how you understand how you might have preached this passage.